And good evening to our fellow listeners and followers. Today is Sunday, May 5th. To our Mexican neighbors down south, happy Cinco de Mayo. It's 8:31 p.m. This is Federico Lyons of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. And tonight's episode, we have two segments: a rise of labor unions against the American working man, and magistrate sheriffs keep infringing on our rights. We're going to start with unions. Federico and I, we met each other working for the National Right to Work Committee quite a while ago, almost a couple decades ago. But, so we believe in the people's right to work without being forced to join a union and pay dues to this collectivist organization. But we've got a lot of union stuff popping up right now, from Starbucks having a Supreme Court case regarding unionization of workers, Waffle House union issues, Volkswagen, and states like Michigan getting rid of right to work laws in their state. It's a lot of news popping up right now, and it's a good time to kind of talk about this. And, my take up front is that, I'm generally opposed to unions. I'm definitely, I don't think public sector unions should exist, but a lot of the news that we're talking about has to deal with private sector unions, which I see more of a right of unionization. In the private side, I think workers have the right to come together and there are bad bosses out there. I agree that sometimes workers need to take action. I'm not a big fan of the idea of unions, but we need to have a good sense of principles here on how to deal with these issues. And, it's worrisome when the government's meddling in these things.
Yeah, you're right. And just to backtrack in the introduction, Seth and I, we both met, I think it was in 2006. So, it was a couple of decades ago. And, we share the same ideals that, we're not anti-union. We're anti-forced union. We both believe that we don't have, no worker should be compelled to pay dues to a union as a condition of employment. That's the main argument. That's the main argument of the National Right to Work Committee and the main of a National Right to Work Act or a State Right to Work law based on the Section 14B of the Taft-Hartley Act. So we're not, unions can exist. And you mentioned public sector unions that, public sector unions should not exist. And thank God in 2018, Janus versus AFSCME, public sector unions will no longer be able to collect forced dues by an employee. Now we're facing with private sector employees facing the draft of unionization. As Seth mentioned, Tennessee, you've had Chattanooga, Tennessee, the Volkswagen plant that voted to unionize, and then you had Starbucks and several Starbucks employees that wanted to unionize, and they were let go because of their affiliation with unions, wanted to unionize. And now Supreme Court is trying to see if they would side with the National Labor Relations Board to reinstate these workers that were not union, or Starbucks has every right to let them go because they, I believe Tennessee is an at-will employment law, so they could find any reasonable reason to terminate that employment. But my main concern is that in the 1920s and 30s, even before that, with the Upton Sinclair novel, The Jungle, yes, there were employers and bosses that were taking advantage of the workers, paying them very less money, a lot of even before minimum wage. So, and unions did come to help these employees, these workers. I'm not denying that, there was a time that unions were helpful. But now, with the rise of Jimmy Hoffa and George Meany of the AFL-CIO, they became the corrupt. It was the employers who were the corrupt, that they were making all this money and paying the employees very badly. But now the unions have, have become the bosses and become the corrupt. And you saw Jimmy Hoffa go to jail because he was pinching the pension fund. And all these unions were pinching the pension fund. When I was in Montana with the Right to Work Committee, I was talking to a candidate up in Great Falls, and her husband was a member of the Carpenters Union. And when he passed away, she was still trying to collect his pension and welfare and pension fund. And I don't know if she ever got money. I don't know if she's still with us, Mary Jolly of Great Falls, Montana. But that's the problem, is that, you've had these corruptions. You have this massive collection of welfare and pension fund, just like the Social Security, that you put that money in. But the thing is that you have other people in the cookie jar trying to get that money out. So that's the problem. So, it's a corruption issue that has really escalated. So when you see Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden and even Donald Trump that claims that therefore labor unions, whether it's a police union or something like that, you're contributing to that corruption. You're contributing to that disorder that is this country. And quite frankly, I wish we didn't have unions in the beginning, if employers would be just great with their employees. But it is what it is. But we have to, like Seth said, find ourselves with principles and honesty and just treat everybody with respect, and then we wouldn't have these abuses of corruption by the labor unions.
Yeah, and to me, I have a problem with the idea of this separate entity called a union, where people then have careers as union bosses who aren't productive. They're just they're just kind of corrupt. There are corrupt business owners, and then you have corrupt union bosses. And I view the right of people, workers. They have a right to organize, and if they're being abused by their employer. But I question whether creating this separate entity called a union, where you hire people who their only job is, being a union boss. I question whether that's the appropriate way to go. I have a problem with collective bargaining. If I'm working for an employer and, I'm a harder worker than, the guy sitting next to me, and yet I get paid the same, even though I'm more productive, that's going to bother me, because we're told that we need to be paid the same, even though I'm more productive than the other guy. But ultimately, some of the stuff, you go back to when unions really got their start, there was actual criminal activity happening from some of these employers who were, there's some very very tough stories that I've heard of where, workers went on strike. They didn't have a union, but they decided not to go to work, and employers, actually killed some of these workers. Here's the answer to that: is you arrest the guy for the employers for breaking the law. But I think we need to kind of understand what unions do. They kind of view you all as one collective, and I'm just very much a believer in individualism, and so that's one of my big problems with unions. And then you look at the public sector. Public sector unions, even FDR, as much as I oppose everything FDR stood for, well, one thing he got right was that the public sector union should never exist. We're now at a point where it used to be that public sector employees made less money, had lower salaries than your average private sector worker, but they had great benefits. Now today, the public sector employees have better salaries and the better benefits. So it kind of has turned us into, we're the servants of the government because of this. And this it has to do with, public sector unions. And they should, not only should we not, should, the Janus decision be there, but the public sector unions shouldn't exist at all. But, there's a lot of moving parts to this. I'm opposed to unions in general, but I recognize the right of workers to organize. But I think there's a better way to do it than making this middleman agency that becomes corrupt, that leads to the rise of Jimmy Hoffas and people like that.
Yeah, and you did mention that, back in the old days, employers used to beat and murder employees when they striked, and yet there was no justice. The same way as when, those employees got the right to collective bargain, and then the unions were their lead man. Whenever the union says, okay, you strike, and there were people that didn't want to strike, they were called scabs, and then many union officials and union workers will beat them and sometimes kill them, and they were not brought to justice. So see, there's a reverse side to that. We don't want it when the employers do it, but it's okay to unions to do it. I know it's a fictional character, but All in the Family, Archie Bunker, he actually spoke very well about how to treat a scab. And, you have to teach a scab a lesson. No, you have to let the scab, if he wants to strike and continue to work, that's his choice, and he doesn't have to follow you. So, if you want to strike, then you go on strike, and if you don't get paid for that day, then that's your own damn problem, because you're following this third agency. So, it really, we went from an employer abuse to a union abuse system, and where many people don't want to tell you that. And, also, despite Chattanooga, Tennessee, organizing Volkswagen, giving the authorization for them to organize, Tennessee is a right-to-work state. But, keep in mind that many non-right-to-work states do have a lot of white-collar jobs, but they don't have any blue-collar jobs anymore. Michigan, sadly, Michigan was a very blue-collar job, forced union blue-collar job state. It really, in 2012, passed the right-to-work law, and I was hearing marvelous things about Michigan's right-to-work law, and businesses were settling back in, and there was a right to, also have a collective bargaining, but also employees kept their money and didn't want to was forced to give. Sadly, Michigan just recently passed the right to work repeal bill, and now it's back to forced unionism for Michigan. So that being said, all those companies that were once in Michigan will probably see ventures to moving to Wisconsin, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia. You'll have that loss. And Illinois is another one that, it's a deep forced unionism state. And now, thanks to a constitutional amendment that it was passed, with union harassment, it's now a collective bargaining state no matter what. And, every employer, if a union wants to come into a shop and wants to unionize, that's it. You're unionized. And I'll never forget the story that, I met this book printer company in Melrose Park, Illinois, owned by a very nice guy. And he was thinking of moving its entire operations because he was tired of always seeing labor unions at his shop trying to get his workers to unionize, and he really was tired. And he was thinking of moving to Indiana. I don't blame the guy. I really don't. And that's what happens is that, when unions become this coercive and harassing and annoying, it's basically annoying, you're going to lose jobs. You're going to lose employment. Ohio lost tremendous jobs. Michigan as well, before 2012, was losing tremendously. All those auto factories were moving down south to either below the Mason-Dixon line or even in Mexico. They have Ford and they have GM down there. So, unions after the 1940s and 1950s, unions, I honestly lost a lot of respect because they got very corrupt. And nowadays, you see Bernie Sanders and President Biden and President Trump, and even Governor DeSantis, my governor of Florida, going up to Chicago to sing praises to the Labor Union of Law Enforcement. You're still giving that welcome wagon to unions are welcome, regardless if it's police unions or firemen's unions. You're still welcome mat that unions are okay. Unions are not okay. Unions are a threat to our workforce, a threat to our individual freedom that Thomas Jefferson once hated. So it's an ongoing battle that people need to understand. And it's a threat to our individual liberty.
Yeah, and I just want people to think about this. So, if you're working for, a real bad boss who's mistreating you, and I know this is hard to do, but the best option is to leave and find another job. But unions it seems like they trap people in this mindset that they've got their job and they're going to do this for the rest of their life. Why don't you have some independence and say, okay, I'm being mistreated here, I'm going to try and find another job. I'm not saying that it's an easy process, but I wouldn't want to work for a bad boss. I wouldn't want to unionize and be under this collective bargaining unit. I would rather find a job with a better employer. And also, I just looked up on the Waffle House unionization, and I just saw one of the comments was that I can't afford groceries. I would suggest to a lot of these employees, how about we stand together? You want to talk about why you can't afford groceries? It's because we have a Federal Reserve System that has destroyed our dollar, and we have, the 16th Amendment and stuff. Why don't we stand together to get rid of the 16th Amendment and actually shut down the Federal Reserve and return to sound money? And then we'll be back to being able to afford groceries with real money. But because there was a time in this country where you could work these types of jobs and make a decent living and be able to afford a house and a car, and but a lot of that has to do with the government destroying our economy and destroying our money. But there are a lot of problems, and we need to actually pinpoint the real issues. And I don't know that unionization actually attacks the real problems.
Now that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that, Seth, on that story about Waffle House. And before we get to our next segment, that's a very good point. People always say, we want to unionize because I can't afford groceries or I can't afford this. Well, and they're always asking for a higher minimum wage. It's all tidbits. It's all these, fancy stories and these political campaign speeches and political maneuvering that, they're not seeing the big picture. The reason why many Americans can't afford is because, again, like you said, it's the Federal Reserve controlling the economy, controlling the interest rates, controlling the wages and all that, and with taxation, with the sanctioned robbery amendment, as I like to call it, the 16th Amendment, and controlling all that. So, when you get paid $8 an hour minimum wage, in some states it's $8, and then you raise it up to $10 or $15, then what is Congress going to see? Oh, look, their wage went up. We need to tax it because, again, under the 16th Amendment, they can find source wherever it derives. So, they get a boost in their minimum wage from 8 to 15, and that's more money coming to your pocket. But then Congress will come in and say, I can tax you, and I will tax you. So then you're back again making $8 an hour. So, people need to really understand that, Congress is, the federal government is not helping you, and unions are not helping you because, it's going to trap you with taxes, and then going to trap you with union fees, and then you're going to end up with maybe $6 an hour post-tax. And, it's people are they fall to the ground by these populist politicians and candidates like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, where they want to help the blue-collar worker when, Bernie Sanders lives in a beautiful mansion in Vermont and probably has an apartment in New York, Manhattan, while the blue-collar worker is living probably in a trailer home or in a very medium-sized house where he doesn't have that luxury. And you're paying attention to these politicians and candidates where they're living the life, and you're not, and you're trying to earn good meats. It's enough is enough in listening to these people, and just focus on what you need to focus on. Stop asking for a minimum wage because you're never for a bump in your minimum wage salary, because you're not going to get it, because Congress will tax you. Stop following people like Trump and Sanders and Biden, because they're not out to help you. A friend of the working man, a friend of labor, is not a friend of the working man. They're more in bed with labor than with the working man. And I saw that in Montana, I saw that in Colorado, I saw that in Indiana, and they're not friends of you. They've never been. So that's a good point you made, Seth, and I'll let you have the last word before we get to our next segment.
Yeah, I just want to encourage people that you don't have to be stuck in this low-paying job. I mean, you should develop skills. You get jobs to develop skills to move up to a better job. And I would encourage people to have real dreams of opening your own business so you work for yourself. We need to focus on the real problems, and there are problems. I feel for some of these workers who feel trapped and stuff, but I think a lot of it, I think the focus needs to be on how our government is destroying our economy through central controls. It would be much better to come together collectively as individuals to stand up against our Leviathan government that's destroying the incentives.
Yeah, you're right. And with that kind of idea of control and infringing on our individual rights and freedoms, our next subject is on infringing on our rights, on our individual lawful rights by these magistrate sheriffs, that they believe that they have a right to control you and they have a right to do whatever they want without, any sense of due process or protecting our Fourth Amendment with our doctrines and with our Fourth Amendment and Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment rights. And I wanna quote from Associate Justice William O. Douglas after he wrote his dissent on Terry versus Ohio, where it gives police the right to question you no matter what, and you have to answer to them or you will face consequences. And I always like to say this quote because we have seen a rise of magistrate sheriffs and believing that they are above the law. And to give the police greater power than a magistrate is to take a long step down the totalitarian path. And that is so true because, police officers, law enforcement are not judges. They're not juries. They're just, they're the enforcers of the law. They're not the magistrates of the law. They don't get to decide who's guilty or not guilty. That's not their job. Their job is to, arrest somebody if they have evidence to arrest and get the proper procedures for that arrest. But when you see a police officer take it above themselves and plant evidence or, do something, then we have a problem. This this ruling of Terry versus Ohio needs to be overturned. This is one thing where both left and right, liberals and conservatives, Republicans and Democrats, must come together. And it's a shame that many jurors in the high court doesn't see it. I know Justice Thomas has always sided with law enforcement and never with the Fourth Amendment. That's not his former colleague, may rest in peace, Justice Scalia. Justice Scalia was more of a proponent of the Fourth Amendment than even with Justice Ginsburg, than with law enforcement. But, this is something that, this is now, labor unions infringe on your employee rights and on your individual rights. Law enforcement has been infringing on your privacy rights and on your rights alone for due process. And it's time to really say stop. And I'm going to point out to Polk County Sheriff Grady Judd, where his rhetoric is a little too extreme. On what he's been saying and all that, where he said, well, we obliged them to shoot him and so we shot him. That's really? I mean, as Seth pointed out before we came on live, this was a guy that was in favor of the COVID lockdowns. You want to be in somebody like him, that he wants to shoot people with just like that, without due process of the law, without taking him to court, just shoot him? That's not the role of a police officer or a law enforcement. And he's not a magistrate or jury. He's just a sheriff. So with that being said, I wouldn't vote for a sheriff if they're going to act like that.
Yeah, you want a sheriff who's going to stand up for the people's rights. With the case that you were talking about, where he said he'd oblige this guy for a gunfight, that happened fairly recently. I haven't seen any body camera footage. I don't know the facts. You have to trust the police word, and I believe you should never trust anybody. You just have their word, especially from government. There needs to be evidence presented. But apparently there was a shootout at a public park after hours, and the guy, they're saying he refused to cooperate. And with all due respect, for a lot of cops, if you are standing on your rights, if you want to remain silent, if they think people who are exercising their rights are uncooperative, and so that's the problem. I don't trust the word of these cops. I'm not saying I know the case enough to know whether the police or the sheriff's deputies were justified in their shooting or not. But the rhetoric is not helpful from this sheriff. I went back and saw he made comments about the jury that gave the Parkland shooter life in prison instead of the death penalty, and he blasted the jury for not giving him the death penalty. And I'm like, hey, dude, you need to butt out. I mean, this is the jury process. They gave him life in prison. What are you making comments about this for? This is not your job. You're the sheriff. You're not the judge. You're not the jury, and you're not the executioner. It's just we see that these types of sheriffs like this guy. He talks tough, and so it leads a lot of conservatives for some reason to support him, and he's talking tough about shooting citizens. Again, I don't know enough of the facts in this case to know whether or not they were justified or not, but calm down on the rhetoric. I mean, go after, instead of, going along with COVID lockdown, you should have been locking up your local politicians who were telling you to do things without law to back it up. But instead, he's talking tough about wanting to shoot citizens. That's not what you should want. It's just you need to tamp down your rhetoric, and I think when you're dealing with the justice system, you need to have a level head. Whether you're law enforcement, whether you're prosecutors, judges, you need to come in with a level head and not be ruled by emotion. You need to prove your cases. You need to have evidence against citizens if you want to take away their rights and put them in jail. And when you're ruled by emotions and you're giving out this insane rhetoric, you're not using reason. You're using emotion, and that should be a warning sign that this is not a guy you want being your sheriff.
No, and with that type of rhetoric, and I really don't have trust with him that he's actually, I think he, with that type of rhetoric, I have reasonable doubt that he's tampering with evidence. And then I know you saw another newsworthy story that there are evidence that police officers were tampering with evidence towards this individual, and this we saw you show me videos of the police tampering with it, and yet this young person was found guilty when cops were tampering with the evidence and falsifying documentation and falsifying evidence, and goes back with again this high level of above the law of law enforcement that the Supreme Court has created. We can go back to the Rodney King beating, or we can go back to the O.J. Simpson. Did Mark Furman plant this evidence? Did the LAPD cover it up and falsified evidence and mishandled evidence? There's this thing that just because you wear a badge, it doesn't mean that we have to respect you. I mean, you are law enforcement, and we'll answer the questions that I think it's deemed proper that I should answer. But I don't have to answer to you. I have to answer to a judge. So if you get pulled over by a law enforcement official and he asks you, why I pulled over? My question is, no. Please tell me why you think I got pulled over. Let me hear your reason. And then I will take that reason and I will take it to the judge and I will say he's incorrect. I didn't do this. That's who I need to answer to, not to law enforcement. He's not the magistrate. He's not the jury. And it's sad that we have seen this Blue Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter. How about the Fourth Amendment matters here, folks? That's what matters, is our Fourth Amendment rights, where people like George Floyd and myself and Orange Citizens and Trayvon Martin and all those, they've had their Fourth Amendment rights infringed upon themselves and taken away. How about that? How about the Fourth Amendment matters, and forget this political circus and tribalism politics of Blue Lives Matter, Back to Blue, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter. Enough of that. Fourth Amendment matters here, and that's why it kind of always takes me off in this, is that nobody wants to talk about the Fourth Amendment. Nobody wants to talk about the Due Process Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, that everybody has a right to a fair trial. Nobody wants to say the presumption of innocence, That what really ticks me off here, where we put on a pedestal law enforcement and our rights down below. Enough already. And with this sheriff in Polk County, Florida, the same thing. There's another sheriff in Lee County, Florida, another one in Florida. Can you believe it, Seth? I don't know if Illinois has those issues, but we have a lot of and this guy from Lee County, Florida, he's from New York, so he's got that Rudolph Giuliani fascist tactic that Rudolph Giuliani did in New York City. Now, many people say he cleaned up the city. I mean, New York was a mess, but he didn't have to use those tactics. So, you have these sheriffs that are very, they think they're above the law and they have no respect for your rights. And quite frankly, I'm not thinking of voting for my Dade County sheriff here, because I don't know how he's going to act. I really don't. So I have no faith in law enforcement whatsoever. So I don't know who to vote for anymore, but it ain't going to be my sheriff.
Yeah, and this case about, as you said, I'd sent this video. In this case, it was in Tallahassee, again, Florida. And this guy, his name is Calvin Riley. He was pulled over in May of 2023. He had his trial just recently, a year later. And he was pulled over. The cops alleged that he had slurred speech and bloodshot eyes, and that he was swerving in the road, which is why he was pulled over. They don't have any dash cam footage of him swerving, so they have no evidence there. But in this case, the guy smartly refused to do field sobriety testing and a breathalyzer, so they have no evidence there. And guess what the body cam footage shows? One of the officers, Mr. Riley is being detained in the squad car, and he's talking to another officer, and the officer who pulled him over is searching through his car without permission, by the way, so there's Fourth Amendment violation. But she finds a bottle of vodka in his car, and she opens the bottle of vodka, and you can hear it on the video. You can hear the seal being broken. So it was a closed bottle of booze. So you're allowed to have liquor in your car as long as it's a closed container. So he had a closed container. She opens it, and then she pours out the booze on the side of the road, and then she throws the bottle back into his car, into his middle panel area. And the other cop comes over and sees, he's got an empty open bottle of booze in his car, and that's the evidence that they have. But this is all captured on body camera footage. That's planting evidence that this cop opened the bottle of booze. This is so egregious to me that I watched this and this is clearly, this guy may have been drunk. I don't know, but it doesn't matter. You planted evidence. This has to be dismissed immediately. But what shocked me was that this guy was found guilty. There's no evidence against him except for tampered or planted evidence that was planted against him, and he was still found guilty. In my opinion, the prosecutor should have saw the body camera footage and immediately said, well, we can't go forward with this case. You planted evidence. And but instead they brought charges. And then, I don't know what kind of judge's discretion there can be, but I would hope that a judge could dismiss the case after seeing this video. But no, the case goes on, and a jury finds him guilty. It astounded me. I was shocked when I saw it. And it was just one of those cases that, the guy wasn't roughed up. He wasn't beat up. It was a couple female cops, by the way, so they couldn't have hurt the guy. The guy was much bigger than them. So it's not like there was physical harm done against him, but he still had his rights violated. And even if he was drunk, you can't go after him because you tampered evidence, you planted evidence. But this is a case that should give us pause and say our justice system is corrupt, and it's corrupt from the prosecution level to the law enforcement level to the judges level to the juries. The juries are corrupt too. We need to really see how much we can't trust the justice system anymore. And I don't know how we get the trust back, but this is because I believe we need a justice system. We need law enforcement. I do believe law enforcement is a legitimate function of local government, but that I have no trust in them, and that's a real problem, and I don't know how to get that trust back, but I do know that we shouldn't trust the system anymore. And like you said, with these sheriffs as well, like Rudy Giuliani, another sheriff who's acting like Rudy Giuliani. I remember stop and frisk, and for some reason, a lot of conservatives like stop and frisk, even though the whole idea of stop and frisk was to get illegal guns off the street. Well, I believe more guns equals less crime. I thought that was a conservative saying. I don't believe in illegal guns. I'm a nut when it comes to that. It's like, I will take dangerous liberty over peaceful tyranny any day. So even if you can prove that Rudy Giuliani cleaned the streets of New York, it doesn't matter if you're violating people's rights. I prefer liberty over security. And we need to get back to preferring liberty over security. We need to understand too that police are not there to protect you all the time. I mean, as the old saying goes, when seconds matter, the police are minutes away. I mean, we need to be able to protect ourselves if a situation arises where you have to, and then you hope that the police are there to catch criminals after crimes have been committed. But we need to stop looking for the police to go out and be thugs. We want them to enforce the law, not be thugs.
Yeah, and I think this issue is very passionate to you and I, Seth, because it is an infringement on our individual rights, on our individual legal rights. And when and one thing I'm going to point out to that case with this young man, cops were tampering with evidence and with his items in his automobile. Many people are not aware of your rights. Many people do not, the American political system want to keep the American citizens ignorant to the fact. You don't have to. If a cop says, "Can we search your vehicle?" you said, "No, you can't unless you get a warrant." Call up a judge, wake him up in his bed, and tell him, "I need a warrant." And the judge will say, "What for?" "Okay, you got it or you don't got it." But, the American people need to understand that, you don't have to respond to every single thing the cop asks you. If they ask you, "Can I search your vehicle?" you plain out and say, "No, you cannot. Not without a warrant. You cannot search my vehicle without a warrant. Get it. I'll wait here. I'll wait here until you get a warrant." Like I said, we'll go wake up the judge out of his Betty Bye and ask him to provide a warrant so you can search my car. But that's the thing, is that a lot of American people, a lot of American citizens, mostly Black Americans, or it doesn't matter the race. It's just that a large majority of American citizens are not quite aware of their rights, and we've entrusted this law enforcement like a white knight in a shining armor, where they're coming to save us. Again, I don't own a gun, but if I hear somebody coming into my home, I'm going to arm myself with something I can, and I'm going to protect my home, and that's self-defense. So I could grab a knife. I could grab a golf club. I got plenty of golf clubs, and that's a weapon. I could grab whatever I can to protect my home. I don't need law enforcement to protect me. And quite frankly, I mean, that's the least of my problems. But, the American people need to understand their rights. And this is why you've had a lot of people, think that you have to respond to law enforcement and answer to the questions and be all civil and do not restrain, do not resist. No. I mean, you don't have to resist, but you just don't have to answer to their questions. And just be calm and says, what did I do wrong, officer? What did I do wrong? No, you don't have a right to search my vehicle. And then we would have a different story. But unfortunately, there are some law enforcement that believe that, they think they're above the law and they can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And that has to stop. And the stop and frisk situation that the Supreme Court has gave a carte blanche to law enforcement needs to be overturned. That's one of them that both left and right individuals needs to come to terms and needs to overturn that Supreme Court ruling, because it's really endangering our lives. And, you could apply the Fourth Amendment to the violation the NSA has done. You could apply it to anything that, the federal government or state governments have done. It's a clearly violation of our rights, and people need to know that. And again, this is a very passionate issue for myself and for Seth, because this is truly an infringement of our legal rights. We have a right of due process. We have a right to declare innocence. We can declare innocent and let them talk and I don't have to open my mouth if I don't want to. And, my lawyer will do it, or I can be my own lawyer and present my case. So, as simple as that. So my final point is that, again, know your legal rights guaranteed by the federal Constitution. Just because it's federal Constitution doesn't mean states don't apply it. Oh, yes, of course states apply it. States have to apply this legal right. And it's right there as a U.S. citizen. So my last comment is, know your rights, people, for God's sakes. If law enforcement pulls you over, you don't have to evilly resist. You don't have to answer their questions, and that's it. You don't have to answer to them. You have to answer to a magistrate, and you have to explain it to the magistrate, to the judge, not to law enforcement. Law enforcement just gives you the ticket or gives you a warning, and that's that. They have no right to question you, because they're not a prosecutor and they're not the judge. So, that's my last thing, is that know your rights and know what to do when a cop pulls you over, and just protect your rights. What's your last thought, Seth?
Yeah, I would concur, and just say, understand that when you're complying with an officer, that they're collecting evidence against you. It's not like in this case that we were discussing with the evidence being planted. This guy refused to do a breathalyzer test, refused to do field sobriety tests. Understand this, that you're only, when they ask you to do these things, you're only giving them evidence to use against you in a court. So, only comply with what you legally have to comply to. You don't have to answer questions. Just know your rights and use them, and give, if you're pulled over for giving a justified reason for being pulled over, give them your license. But from there on out, just remain silent, because whatever you say can only harm you. It can't help you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say give them their license, because again, that's complying to their authority. I would just say give me whatever you need to give me, and then I'll go respond to the judge. Because again, you're not a judge, you're not a jury, you're not an attorney, you're just a law enforcement saying that you said that I made a violation, I committed a violation. Then give me what you got to give me, and then I will go to the judge, and the judge will answer all my questions, and the judge will ask me all the questions, and I will answer to the judge. But law enforcement are not magistrates. They're not the executioner. They're not the, for the sheriff up in Polk County, Florida, or the sheriff in Lee County, Florida, and to all the sheriffs out there in the rest of the country, you're not the executioner. You're not the magistrate. To all the law enforcement, you're not. So get off this high horse and just protect our rights and protect us, and that's it. So, that's basically it for the, protect our Fourth Amendment rights and know your Fourth Amendment rights. And, cops are not there to be your friends. They will hurt you. So, just try to answer them as much as less minimal questions as you can, and just be careful out there. So, with that being said, hope you all have a great week ahead, and be careful and stay safe, and we'll see you guys next Sunday.
Yep. Good night.